Nature equipped one dinosaur with a set of 4-ninja daggers on a whip-like tail. It gave another a wrecking ball made of solid bone. These weren't accidents. They were answers. Answers to a single, terrifying question that echoed through the Mesozoic. How do you stop a multi-ton murder machine that wants to eat you alive? This is the story of an arms race. The surgical precision of the Stegosaurus's spike versus the brute force nihilism of the Ankylosaurus's sledgehammer. And by the end of this, you'll understand that in the evolutionary war for survival, the only rule is to build a better weapon than the monster that's hunting you. So, let's start with the classic, the Stegosaurus. For decades, we looked at those tail spikes and thought, cute, defensive little toothpicks. That is dangerously, catastrophically wrong. The shocking claim: that tail wasn't just a weapon, it was a predator-specific precision-guided assassination tool. Its name is the thagomizer, and it was built for one purpose: to kill Allosaurus. Don't believe me? The evidence is literally written in bone. In 1998, paleontologists found an Allosaurus tail vertebra with a gaping conical hole punched right through it. When they modeled the tail spike of a Stegosaurus, it was a perfect match. The murder weapon fit the wound. This wasn't a lucky shot. Biomechanical studies show the Stegosaurus's tail was surprisingly flexible at the base but rigid at the end, turning the entire structure into a terrifyingly accurate swinging lance. It could whip those spikes around at over 40 miles per hour, likely targeting the predator's vulnerable underbelly or, as we've seen, its spine. And get this, those bone spikes were just the core. In life, they would have been covered in a sheath of keratin, making them even longer, sharper, and more horrifyingly effective. Now, think about the implications. This wasn't a clumsy club you just flailed around. This was a biological rapier. The Stegosaurus was a fencer, and its tail was its sword. It had to judge distance, anticipate movement, and aim for a kill shot, all while a 2-ton carnivore with steak knives for teeth was charging it. It's like trying to mug a sentient house-sized porcupine, only to discover it's also a master of medieval swordsmanship. The thagomizer wasn't designed to bruise or deter. It was designed to puncture, to slide between ribs, to shred organs, to cripple a hunter and leave it bleeding out in the Jurassic mud. A failed experiment, gasping for air. So, the spike was a nearly perfect defensive weapon, a surgical instrument of death, honed over millions of years. Which begs an obvious question: if evolution had already created the perfect predator-killing spear, why did it throw the design away and start over? What new kind of monster was coming that a spear just wouldn't work against? The answer is Tyrannosaurus rex. The new monster on the block wasn't a nimble slasher like Allosaurus. It was a 7-ton bipedal woodchipper. This brings us to our next shocking claim. The Ankylosaurus wasn't just an armored herbivore. It was a living fortress that evolved its own wrecking ball because the very nature of warfare had changed. Fencing was over. This was trench warfare. First, the armor. We're not talking about a few plates here and there. We are talking about a comprehensive, top-to-bottom suit of biological armor. Fused plates of bone, called osteoderms, created a shield so dense it was basically impenetrable. It even had armored eyelids. The Ankylosaur's entire defensive philosophy was based on a simple, elegant principle. You can't be eaten if the predator can't find a single weak point to bite. This was a direct response to the T-Rex's greatest weapon, a bite force capable of delivering over 12,000 pounds of pressure. That's enough to crush a car. A spear is useless against an enemy that can shatter your spine with a single bite. So, evolution built a tank. And what do you give a tank? A cannon. The Ankylosaur's tail was a masterpiece of brutalist engineering. The last third of its vertebrae were fused together to form a stiff, immovable handle, and at the end was a massive, tightly packed knob of solid bone. Let's savor the horror of that. The Stegosaurus was a duelist, relying on a quick, precise jab. The Ankylosaurus was a bouncer with a sledgehammer. Its strategy wasn't to inflict a fatal wound. It was to inflict a crippling one. It didn't aim for the heart. It aimed for the legs. That club, swinging with the force of the entire animal's hip structure behind it, wasn't meant to pierce. It was meant to shatter, to turn a T-Rex's massive, powerful tibia into a bag of wet gravel. An immobilized predator is a dead predator. The Ankylosaur looked at the most terrifying killer to ever walk the earth and created a weapon, specifically designed to break its ankles, leaving it to starve. It's the difference between a ninja's blade and a bank vault's door. The Ankylosaur was a walking, breathing bank vault that could break your shins if you got too close. So we have two incredible, opposing designs. A surgical spike against a bone-crushing sledgehammer. But which weapon was actually better? The evidence for the answer is hidden not in the tail, but in the tiny walnut-sized brains of the beasts that wielded them. Get ready for the weirdest twist yet. The choice between a spike and a club wasn't just an anatomical one. It was a trade-off in neural processing power. The shocking claim is this: one of these weapons required a surprisingly complex targeting system, while the other outsourced its defense to pure, dumb, beautiful physics. Let's be clear, neither of these animals was a genius. Both had brains roughly the size of a walnut, which in a 4-ton animal is not impressive. But Stegosaurus had a secret weapon. For years, scientists were baffled by a large cavity in its hip vertebrae, speculating it housed a second brain. It didn't. What it housed was a massive bundle of nerves called a sacral ganglion. Essentially, the Stegosaurus offloaded a huge amount of its processing power from its tiny brain to its butt. Why? To aim. To control the complex, flexible thagomizer as a precision weapon. It needed a dedicated, high-speed controller located right at the source. It was running sophisticated targeting software directly from its hips. The Ankylosaurus, on the other hand, needed no such thing. Its tail was a simple, ballistic weapon. Less aiming, more swinging in a wide, destructive arc. Its brainpower wasn't dedicated to fancy tail work, but to sensory input. It had an incredible sense of smell, likely for finding food and detecting predators long before they got close. Why waste precious neurons on aiming when your weapon is a wrecking ball? This is the horrifying trade-off. The Stegosaurus was a sniper, its butt-brain calculating trajectory and wind speed to land one perfect, lethal shot. The Ankylosaurus was the demolition guy with a grenade launcher. Its strategy was, is the T-Rex somewhere in that general hemisphere? Good enough. Swing. One requires immense skill and precision reflexes. The other just requires you to pull the pin and let physics handle the messy details. Evolution looked at the escalating threat of the Cretaceous and decided that dumb, breakable, and explosive was a much safer bet than smart, agile, and pointy. So we have two perfect killing machines, each a master of its own era. A fencer running on a high-speed spinal processor versus a living bulldozer with a sledgehammer for a tail. But this entire arms race, from the spear to the hammer, reveals a darker, more fundamental truth about evolution itself. It isn't about getting better. It's about becoming just monstrous enough to survive one more day. So, spike versus sledgehammer. Who wins? The answer is both. The Stegosaurus's thagomizer was a rapier, a work of deadly art perfectly tuned to puncture the thin-skinned hunters of the Jurassic. But when the predators became titans, when jaws evolved to crush bone, the rapier was obsolete. Evolution, in its cold, brutal calculus, abandoned surgical precision for overwhelming force. It built the Ankylosaur, a living fortress armed with a simple, terrifying sledgehammer, designed not to stab, but to shatter the very bones of the Cretaceous's apex predator. This wasn't an upgrade. It was a complete and total reinvention of defensive warfare, driven by the ever-escalating horror of the predator-prey arms race. The story of these two living weapons proves a chilling point. Evolution doesn't strive for elegance or perfection. It just builds monsters that are tough enough to survive the monsters that hunt them. What other evolutionary arms races should we stick under the microscope? The saber-tooth versus the mammoth, the sea scorpion versus the armored fish. Pitch your brutal matchups in the comments below. And if you enjoy your science with a healthy dose of existential dread, hit subscribe. You're in the right place.